Hello Greymains. I've been meaning to get this review out for a while, but well, it's finally here. On this channel, reviews are kept simple and consistent. You'll see the score breakdown on the thumbnail. We'll cover the game's premise, development, and I'll give you a quick buyer's guide before breaking down all the categories that are in the thumbnail. Crimson Desert is a brand new IP from Pearl Abyss, the studio best known for Black Desert Online. It released in March 2026, after roughly 8 years of development, having first entered production in 2018. Officially, it's an action-adventure open world game, but that description doesn't really tell the full story. You play as Cliff, leader of the Greymains, a mercenary clan scattered by war and betrayal. Your goal is to reunite your people and liberate the continent of Pywell from various threats tearing it apart. So that's pretty much the game. Now, should you buy it? If you enjoy games like Black Desert Online, which I've never played, but it's a survival sandbox, life simulator, or open-ended RPGs where player freedom is king, then yes, absolutely. If you're expecting to go into this game with something like Skyrim, Witcher 3, Kingdom Come Deliverance, something like that, you're probably going to be disappointed. Crimson Desert has a story, has side quests, has characters, but the narrative isn't really where the game shines. The real appeal is the freedom to do sort of anything that you want. You want to become a farmer? Go for it. You want to raise livestock? No problem. You want to become a blacksmith, a merchant, or tame horses, sell them. If you want to become a gardener, a fisherman, bounty hunter, trader, treasure hunter, monster stuff, so much stuff you can do, and the amount of activities as well, staggering. Pearl Abyss is bringing out new stuff every week as well. They're one of the best development studios I've ever seen. Now, they call this an action-adventure game, but in practice, I think it's more like a single-player MMORPG, although that doesn't quite make sense because it's not a massive multiplayer, but it feels like that's how it was designed, and in fact, I think it was originally meant to be that MMORPG, and you'll see that if you get the game. It definitely feels like it should be filled with other people within the world, and it plays like an MMORPG. So that's the kind of sandbox you're working with. Now, you begin weak and vulnerable, but over time you become an absolute powerhouse, almost like a god. The progression is one of the most satisfying parts of the experience because the game does not hand you anything at all. There's no training wheels in this game. In fact, it deliberately explains very little. You'll be forced to experiment, explore, figure systems out for yourself, or, check my YouTube out if you need help. Sometimes that's frustrating, but most of the time it's incredibly rewarding. I fully recommend discovering things naturally before diving into guides or min-max strategies and all that stuff. The sense of discovery is one of Crimson Desert's greatest strengths. You'll see a lot of people that have maybe tweeted about the game, and after nearly 100 hours they hadn't even left the first region. Now, I've spent over 300 hours in the game and I've still not completed everything. There's still legendary hunts, hidden bosses, challenges, secrets, professions, loads of things that I haven't explored yet. At minimum, I think most players will easily get 100 plus hours from a single playthrough, and by the end you'll have access to elemental powers, incredible mounts, powerful gear, and some of the most over-the-top combat abilities I've seen in an RPG. There's so many ways to play this game. So to summarize, Crimson Desert plays like a single-player MMORPG style sandbox packed with content, freedom, puzzles, progression systems, and challenging encounters. The return on investment alone makes it easy to recommend, and perhaps most importantly, Pearl Abyss has shown genuine commitment to improving the game. Weekly updates, new mechanics, balance changes, and future DLC plans all suggest this game will continue growing long after launch. There's DLC. Now, I trust the studio to support this game, and I respect its community, so if that's all you wanted, the recommendation, yes, buy Crimson Desert. I would give it a 9 out of 10 overall, as you can see, and if you're leaving here, thanks for watching, and consider subscribing for more honest, straight to the point reviews. For everyone else, I'm going to break down the score into more detail now. So let's start off with the gameplay, which is a 10 out of 10 in the rating that I've given it there. Trying to explain why the gameplay score is a perfect 10 would take an entire video on its own, so I'm just going to break it down into 4 categories: combat, puzzles, traversal, activities, and professions. So combat feels fantastic. You've got counters, perfect counters, dodges, perfect dodges, combos, wrestling moves, martial arts. You've got a huge variety of weapon types. You've got swords, spears, axes, rapiers, hammers, shields, firearms, cannons, and other stuff that I don't want to spoil. The combat has genuine depth, but that depth comes with complexity. Some players might initially struggle because of the learning curve, the move sets and timing, and all that stuff takes a little bit of effort. Once it clicks though, you feel unstoppable, which is really satisfying. Puzzles, they're excellent. I really love a puzzle, so they're varied, they're physics-based, it rewards experimentation. Unlike many open world games that rely on repetitive puzzle design, Crimson Desert constantly introduces new twists and mechanics. They're challenging without becoming frustrating. So for example, some puzzles might might require you to just move something left, right, up, down, whereas other puzzles require you to use an elemental ability to turn a windmill of some kind to drain water to move a platform or something, or stab something to drain. There's loads of different ways they utilize puzzles in the game, and it's really challenging and rewarding. Traversal. Now that starts out rough, so you'll start moving around and feeling quite slow, and there's not a lot of places you can go very quickly. You'll get a horse, but as your character develops, your traversal becomes one of the most enjoyable parts of the game. Eventually you'll be soaring through the sky like Neo, or flying through the air like Iron Man, or even like a Targaryen. Now my biggest complaint, probably just that the interact button and the jump button share the same input on a controller. Drives me insane. I think you can change it now, I've just not bothered. And whenever you're trying to open something and you just see Cliff just jumping on the spot, it's sort of a meme by itself at this point. Activities and professions. Now this is where Crimson Desert separates itself from almost every other RPG. You can fish, farm, raise livestock, you can just go mining, you can craft, you can trade, you can gamble, you can collect pets, you can dress your pets, you can arm wrestle, combat tournaments, breed horses, tame horses, sell horses, play mini games like pinball and all these other ones that I've recently done a video on a recent patch where Pearl Abyss added these mini games around the map, and that's just scratching the surface. I've probably forgot quite a lot there. The sheer amount of content available is absurd, and that's why the gameplay gets a 10 out of 10. Not only did I love it, I think most of you will as well. Story, we gave this a 5 out of 10. This unfortunately is where the game struggles. Now I wasn't expecting a narrative masterpiece because I understood the type of game that I was playing. Crimson Desert is about exploration, progression, player freedom. The immersion comes from gameplay, not storytelling. The problem is that the story can be difficult to follow and often fails to engage the player emotionally. Only after completing the game and reading some additional lore which you find in a book, which isn't the best way to digest a story, and honestly it shouldn't be necessary. The good news is Pearl Abyss has already announced plans to improve the narrative presentations through future updates like the DLC, as well as additional scenes and dialogue being added to the game. Because the core ideas are actually quite interesting, the execution just isn't there. Now, if you do want spoiled as to what the actual story is, then I can 100% do that for you. So spoiler warning here, and if you don't want spoiled for what the story is, just skip ahead to this timestamp. Okay, so Cliff is one of many warriors that the White Crow and, well, God, I don't know what this guy is, but God, have chosen to take on Umbra, who is, let's just for the sake of argument, just call Umbra the devil. And each time they've failed, they've reversed time to try again. They've experimented with different warriors, giving them these elemental abilities and these powers, and they eventually come across Cliff as being one of the most proficient and the one that is likely to guide them all the way to the end. And the reason they keep going on about him being kind is because imagine Umbra also like the Sith. They're going to try and turn him to the dark side. So that's kind of the basis of the story, and they've done this 108 times. Now, a lot of them, like I think 50 or 60 times, have been with Cliff, and he's failed for numerous reasons. Sometimes they gave him the abilities too quickly and he didn't want them, or he was driven insane, or he turned evil. Sometimes if they tried to tell him everything at once, he would reject them and then not engage them at all. Other times he just simply gave up. There's loads of reasons why, and if you guys want a full breakdown, I'm happy to do that. But the reason why 108 times is important is because in Hinduism, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the distance in our body to the God within us. And we also have apparently 108 vital life force points in our body according to Hinduism. So that's the significance of the 108. And this is their last chance to do it, and eventually Cliff needs to come up against the avatar of Umbra, who is Muradin. So Cliff is like the avatar of the other god, and Muradin is the avatar of the devil. So that's pretty much it. And yeah, if you want a full breakdown, just let me know and I am happy to do that. But again, the story might be getting updates and the DLC should clear a lot of this up, so it might be best waiting to do a video on this, and it might be a bit clearer in the future. Now my biggest issue isn't the plot itself, it's that I never really felt emotionally invested in it. Cliff is incredibly powerful and the game rarely places him or his allies in situations where I actually feared for them. The story needed a major setback, a crushing defeat of some kind, a moment where everything goes wrong. Without that tension, it's difficult to become emotionally attached to the narrative, but that's kind of why the story lands at 5 out of 10, and if you listen to the spoiler section, you can kind of understand why there was no real danger to his allies and why he seemed to win every battle. Characters, we gave that 7 out of 10. The characters sit somewhere in the middle for me. Cliff himself is a solid protagonist. He's not the most charismatic hero that I've ever played, but he's likeable enough and his journey works within the context of the world. The problem is that the game spends so much time giving you freedom that it doesn't spend enough time developing its cast. There's so many characters. There's definitely memorable characters throughout the story, but very few of them receive enough screen time for you to become emotionally attached attached to them. And that ties directly into the issues I mentioned in the story. The villains suffer from the same problem. The concepts behind them are interesting, especially once you understand the wider lore, but most players won't fully appreciate that until later in the game. That said, nobody actively annoyed me. There weren't any characters that felt completely out of place, and the performances themselves perfectly fine. The voice actors do a brilliant job. The issue isn't quality, it's just quantity. The game simply doesn't spend enough time developing these people before moving on to the next activity, quest, or region. For me, characters land at 7 out of 10. Good, memorable enough, but one of the game's weakest areas. Pacing, we also gave a 7 out of 10. This one is difficult because the pacing depends heavily on how you choose to play. If you focus purely on the main story, the pacing can feel a little strange. You'll go from huge cinematic moments into lengthy stretches of exploration, crafting, and side content because, well, you do have like a skill check boss mechanic, so if you don't level up enough, you're going to get absolutely wiped from the next boss. I don't think that's how Crimson Desert was intended to be played though. It's definitely sandbox first, exploration, and then story second, or third, or fourth. The game constantly encourages you to wander off, discover something interesting, and get distracted by another activity. In that sense, the pacing actually works pretty well because you've always got something to find, something new to do. My only criticism is that some systems take too long to fully open up. Early traversals can feel restrictive, and the late game traversals that would be great earlier on, well, they're late game. Once everything unlocks though, the game flows much better and you begin bouncing naturally between combat, exploration, professions, and progression. Overall, the pacing is strong, but it's not perfect, and the story definitely feels like sometimes it goes from completely normal to, well, completely bonkers. So some things just come out of left field and you're really confused what game you're playing. You start off in Hernan, which is definitely medieval sort of feel, and again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but as you go region to region, it certainly throws you. So that's another reason pacing has a couple of points off it. Replayability, this was the easiest score to give. Replayability is ridiculous. The game finishes, but you feel like you've just scratched the surface. You've got loads of achievements probably still to do, and there's legendary hunts, rare mounts, hidden bosses, professions that you can probably try, trading routes, trying to, get as much money as possible, loads of challenges to complete, and enough side activities to keep you occupied for hundreds of hours. More importantly, the gameplay itself is enjoyable enough that I actually wanted to continue playing. That's the biggest compliment I can give a game. The replayability isn't being artificially extended through repetitive, busy work or collecting tokens or a new game plus. It's actual content that you've not done yet. So I'm not sure, does that qualify as replayability? Because if you finish everything before finishing the story, well, I'd be very impressed. But even then, I think you'd probably want to continue playing the game because the world is just that engaging. And lastly, we'll get to price. Now, price is always subjective because everyone's financial situation is different, but when I look at value for money, Crimson Desert's the easiest recommendation I could make. The game launched at the same price point as many modern AAA titles that offer you 20-30 hours of content. Crimson Desert gives you hundreds. Even if you only play for 100 hours, which I think is a conservative estimate, you're getting exceptional value for your money. The amount of content, systems, and activities available is staggering, and the fact that you're going to be getting DLC soon, well, that's even more recommendation to do that. And the DLC, I wouldn't put it past Pearl Abyss to even give it for free, but take that with a pinch of salt. So final verdict, that brings us to the final score that I gave the game, which is 9 out of 10. Now, the overall average of all the scores that I've given here, you can see is probably, I think it's like 8.1 or something. I've chucked an additional point on that purely because of the studio themselves and how much they care about their customers and how much content they're putting into this game regularly. They deserve that extra point purely because of that. Now, this game isn't for everyone. If you're looking for tightly written narrative experiences, which I love, by the way, I love games like The Witcher 3 and most recently James Bond's First Light. It's a purely linear driven story, but it's a great game. But if you want a massive sandbox where you can forge your own adventure, build your own story, and genuinely lose hundreds of hours without realizing it, Crimson Desert is one of the best games released this year. Pearl Abyss took a huge risk creating a new IP, and I think it paid off. For me, it's an easy recommendation. Thanks for watching, and if you've enjoyed the review, leave a like, subscribe for future reviews, and I'll see you guys in the next one.